But we did have well, one movie with a higher budget than that, and one movie with a budget much lower than that just came out at the box office. Jeremy,
Barbenheimer 2.
Well, like I said last week, there's no way it's going to reach those heights, but similar in terms of movies that are released for two completely different demographics, and that would be Wicked and Gladiator. Wicked opens to record-setting 114 million. Gladiator 2 starts strong with 55.5 million.
It's a solid opening weekend for both.
Yeah, I mean, Gladiator, I thought that Wicked, I've been saying for months that Wicked would open over $100 million. Once we saw the projections, I thought maybe 120-ish, ends up at 114. Gladiator, I thought would be around 60, little less than that at 55.5 million. Gladiator 2 is performing way better internationally, though, than Wicked is, which is another thing that we had kind of talked about for the past couple weeks and months. I don't know exactly if Wicked has the same type of pull internationally as it does here in the United States, but certainly a strong start, especially for Wicked. Now, Gladiator 2 released internationally last week. So it had its first weekend. It made a little over, I think, $80 million, $85 million internationally last weekend, and then made about $55 million here in its opening weekend. Wicked, $114 million in its opening here, and a little over $50 million in its international opening. I don't know if they've opened in all places yet.
Well, I'm kind of, again, Ryan was right. We got to give Ryan credit. He was one of the only people in this whole sphere of the internet that was saying, like, because when all the controversy surrounding the actress started to happen, everybody like, oh, it's gonna bomb, it's gonna be it, and Ryan's like, no, it's not. It's gonna make at least $100 million opening weekend. Then we'll see what happens after that. Yeah. Word of like so over we've got a couple things. Obviously we look at the Rotten Tomatoes scores and things like that. So Rotten Tomatoes is a 97% audience score. Everybody that's seen it has had very good things to say about it. Even Gary, who didn't like it because he said, what did he say? It was hell for him, but he admitted like everything around the movie, like the sets, the performances, and all of that was good. It's just not for him. But everybody seems to like it that's seen it. And then you go to our critic list, and out of 15 votes over here, 77% audience score so far. So word of mouth seems to be very strong for it. But like you said, the international box office is the interesting one because that's not playing very well.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's actually open in all places yet for that. But that's kind of another thing that I had said. I just don't know what that international pull is going to be like. But when you do look at both of these movies, the problem is that Gladiator costs twice as much as Wicked. Wicked cost $300 million for two movies that they filmed back to back. They filmed part one and part two back to back. So about $150 million budget for this movie, probably a fairly big marketing budget. And I'm sure for them, $550 million is probably their break-even point, especially if a lot of that comes from domestic. For Gladiator, it's a little bit different story. $300 million to make that movie, probably at least another $100 million in marketing. That's going to have a long way to go for it to break even. Say, for instance, if both these movies somehow go the right way and they both end up at $700 million, that's a success for Wicked. That's not for Gladiator. So that's the way we're going to be looking at these things and tracking them. And I do think that Wicked had an A cinema score, which means just like Barbie, that the people who were interested in going initially, like opening weekend, that were going to go this because they thought they were interested, they loved what they saw. It completely lived up to their expectations. Gladiator, I think, was more of a BB plus, so not quite as good. I think Wicked's going to have a good hold, but does Moana coming out, because that's going to be very big over Thanksgiving. Does Moana coming out, does that help these movies, getting more people to theaters to potentially see something else they like? Is it more competition, so it takes away from them? That's the interesting story, because I think the Moana and Wicked audience is going to cross over a lot more than Moana and Gladiator.
What's weird is, Moana 2 coming out is so out of... I have not heard anything about this movie. There's like no... At least for me. I don't know if... Has this been something you've seen marketed heavily? I haven't seen this marketed heavily at all.
And I don't know about marketed. I've obviously been very aware of it. And
yeah,
like all that
I
stuff,
like the first Moana.
Out.
I thought the first Moana was great, but I've
never seen it.
Yeah, I thought the first one was great, but this one I just haven't even heard anything about it. The only thing I've heard about is I guess the live action version, which is coming out, which looks horrendous, with The Rock. So yeah, but that's true though with it because is it coming out this weekend?
It's probably Wednesday is my guess, and it has the big Thursday, Thanksgiving, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So yes, it's gonna be the long Thanksgiving, and this is probably gonna end up being like the biggest Thanksgiving weekend ever in history.
Yeah,
it's gonna be
absolutely
big.
Yeah, this is gonna be huge. With Gladiator I haven't looked at the Gladiator reception yet. Like here, let me look that up while we're talking about it because
it's not as good as the first. Now the critics didn't necessarily adore the first movie. I think it's probably got like an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics, somewhere around there. The first Gladiator.
Yeah.
The second one, certainly not the audience reception that the first one had. I watched the second one, and I think it's a very average movie, 5.5 maybe. I wouldn't call it a bad movie, but the problem is you're following up a fucking masterpiece in Gladiator, and you have a character in Lucius who he is not Russell Crowe, and he is not Maximus Decimus Meridius. He's just not. So that's the biggest, to me, that's the biggest flaw in the movie, is that the main character's motivations and his acting, it's just not as good as what we saw for what do you call it? For the first Gladiator.
So Criticless, we have a 48%, 26 votes. And then over on Rotten Tomatoes, 72 and an 84. So not, it's fine. I mean, it's getting decent, feedback. I mean, over here is a 48 over, like I said, on Criticless, which is lower than Wicked. So I don't know. And again, if you guys haven't, please go over there and sign up. The Geeks Gamers community is crazy over there. So you guys, we're almost at 500 members now over there. So love seeing that. But yeah, so it will be interesting. This will be, like Ryan said, this will probably be the biggest, do you think, ever Thanksgiving weekend ever, potentially?
It might be the biggest Thanksgiving weekend ever. That's what a lot of people are speculating. We can get into this article a little bit here. And by the way, Wicked is the third biggest opening of the year, behind Deadpool and Wolverine and Inside Out 2. That's how big it is. Let's see. It's a juggernaut, blah, blah, blah. Wicked, this is what we talked about, the difference in demographics. While Wicked was courting women, nearly 75% of ticket buyers were women for Wicked. So very much targeted towards a certain demographic. Not exactly the same when it comes with Gladiator. Here we go. Either way, this weekend was one of the biggest of the year with approximately $210 million in overall revenue. And boon times at the box office will continue to Thanksgiving as Disney's Moana 2 swims to theaters on November 27th. This is important to note for the entire year, though. Year-to-date ticket sales are still 10% behind 2023 and a quarter, 26% behind 2019. We just talked about how 2019, so many movies made $1 billion fucking dollars. We are tracking 25% less than that for this year. That's not in terms of just money or overall box office revenue, because ticket prices can go up. This is tickets sold, ticket sales, which can tell you more sometimes than actual money can, because that's just how it is. I mean, look at it's important because when you look at stuff like we were talking about that and analyzing with something like Thor: Love and Thunder, which they made a big deal about that opening weekend for Thor: Love and Thunder. But if you looked at the ticket sales, it was actually like maybe the worst Thor opening they'd had. So always got to keep that stuff in perspective. I think that Wicked is going to track well. The one thing that they should be worried about domestically, obviously great opening. Internationally is where I'm interested to see where it goes, because if they want to have a truly smash hit, not just a financially successful movie, which I think Wicked will go on to be, and I've said that for a while, but a smash hit, I think those international ticket sales need to pick up for them. So I don't know if they're released in all territories yet.
Yep. We will see. I've heard a lot of people trying to make this out to be like the Barbenheimer too. And I guess it's probably the closest thing you're going to see to that. And I think that's a good thing to have those types of competitions out there because it gets more and more people interested. And then you bring Moana into it as well. So it could be good. So I'm all for it. I'm glad people are happy. And even with Gladiator, I think a lot of, remember that first Gladiator trailer, how downvoted it got? Like that thing got downvoted to hell.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people were going into that thinking that this was going to be an absolute disaster. But it doesn't seem like the general consensus is that it's the worst thing ever. It seems like
the general consensus is that it's a disappointing sequel.
Yeah.
You know, following up such an incredible movie in Gladiator. It's a disappointing sequel.
Yeah.
Overall, I think it's very, very, very average. I didn't have a terrible time. You know, I enjoyed parts of it. Some of it, I wish they'd maybe done a couple things different, but yeah, I don't know if it's going to have the legs to get out to 800 million or whatever it probably needs to break even, though.
Yeah,